Buen día todos y todas. No sé qué pasó en la fiesta de las ONGs ayer, pero a lo mejor ustedes no se fueron porque si no, no hubiera estado aquí, pero qué bueno que están con nosotros. So, good morning everybody. It's my pleasure and an honor to introduce Mary Robinson, who is president of the Mary Robinson Climate Justice Foundation. She's going to chair our first panel this morning. And the topic is how organizations are both learning about integrating climate into development and how organizations are providing learning and knowledge where that's necessary. So Mary, please could you join us on the stage, and also the first panelists, and Mary will introduce them all to you. We're very lucky that Mary had time to chair this panel. She's been a supporter of D&C Days previously in the past. You'll know her for her work on climate justice, and we anticipate that this will be a refreshing session on how these organizations are approaching learning how to get climate into development programming. And we should also note that D&C Days is so important that this is Mary's first stop, having arrived in Lima this morning.
Okay, thank you very much. Buenos dias, good morning everybody. I'm delighted that this event is the first event that I'm attending at this particular COP because I'm a long admirer of the Development and Climate Days, and also I like this zero poverty, zero emissions within a generation. If we can do that, then we're on course for a good, safe world. And it's very good to have the opportunity to draw out some practitioners in the sense of development agencies that are learning how to effectively integrate climate change into development programming. So this first panel includes representatives of government development agencies, and they'll have a chance to describe how they go about finding the most effective ways to integrate climate into development programming in their priority sectors. And then in the second part, we will have climate and development knowledge broker organizations who will have an opportunity to describe how they're generating and making available information, evidence, data, etc. And we'll see in the final part where you'll be able to question the whole, both sets of contributors, raise some issues if we haven't covered these issues. I'm going to introduce the panel. Their names actually are above us, and we're going to have a kind of question and answer session where initially, anyway, there will be no surprises. The questions will be, have been already more or less circulated. So I expect very informed answers from this panel because they've had an opportunity to think about these questions. And I'm going to start with Vera Scholz, who's the GIZ head of climate and environment. And I'm going to put to you, Vera, the first set of questions. And these are really, how has GIZ recognized climate effects on development? Is it a priority to address these effects? And how do the gender differentiated effects of climate change come through and merit attention? So you go first and make sure the mic is on. It probably is.
I think so, it is on.
Good.
Thank you so much, Mary, for this kind introduction, and I also very much like this term of 0-0, because sometimes I still have the feeling that the development community and the climate community is not always kind of together, because this is sometimes also a different type of people a little bit. So I'm very happy to have the slogan of zero poverty and zero emissions. Well, yes, for GIZ and German Development Cooperation in general, climate change has become a priority. And if I look just at the GIZ's portfolio, it's now 1/3 of our projects which are looking into climate change. And from this 1/3, about half is on adaptation. And why is that so? Because, I mean, we could see in our projects that the implementation is quite affected by climate change. So my colleagues who are working, for example, in agriculture, they could feel that something is changing because of, for example, extreme weather events. Or there are certain regions where we are working where it is slowly getting more drier. So then you have to look into the issues. I mean, how do you in the future advise farmers what to plant? yeah, so to shift to other crops maybe, and this has a lot to do then also to talk with the government. But that was one thing, to see that climate change is affecting our work. The other one was, I mean, how to cope with this fact institutionally. And it was also our Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development who, for all German development cooperation organizations, not only for GIZ but also for KfW, they introduced the environment and climate assessment. So each of our projects has to go through this assessment, and this is not voluntary, this is mandatory. And we also started to develop a tool we are calling climate proofing for development. And that was also made possible through a collaboration with the OECD. So we had also partners in other organizations we could discuss about these issues. So what we thought, that it is not only a matter to introduce climate considerations in our own projects we are running with the governments all over the world, but also to assist governments to climate-proof their programs themselves. So, for example, here in Peru, we have been running a program where we work with the Peruvian government to, well, use the climate lens when they deal with their investment programs. Now, coming to your question about gender issues. This is also mandatory in our projects in Germany, that we do a gender assessment. So how can we introduce gender issues in our programs? That is true not only for the climate programs, but also for any other. And we started to embark on more studies how exactly climate change is affecting women. I mean, we all know that they are more impacted by poverty. So now they are even more impacted by climate change and poverty. So here we have done some initial research so that at the end of the day we can also design our projects that they are helpful for women.
Thank you very much. I think that's got us off to a good start. And I'm going to put the same questions to you, Adrian Fitzgerald, the policy lead for climate change resilience policy team of the Department of Foreign Affairs in Ireland. We actually were together in Malawi, you reminded me, not so long ago, and you were working there on the ground. But again, it's how do you recognize climate effects on development? Is it a priority? And the gender dimensions?
Very good. Very similar to Vera and GIZ's experience in terms of what's actually happening in our programs. Ireland has prioritized, in terms of Irish Aid's work, focusing on hunger and nutrition and trying to address that. And what we found is that that's very closely linked, obviously, to agricultural production and smallholder farmer work. And in recent times, we found that the situation in sub-Saharan Africa of erratic rains and effects on harvest is making it very, very hard for people to predict when to plant. And the old systems that appear to be there that had worked for a long time are starting to be affected in terms of when people start planting. And
when you say erratic rains, could you spell out a bit more what kind of impacts that have?
Sure. In terms of erratic rains, we take one particular case. In Malawi, normally people would expect the rains to start in October, and they would run probably to late March, early April. The rains would start easy and then become more intense and then fade off at the end of April. But what's been happening more recently is you may get rains that start very intensely for a week and then stop for several weeks, and then they restart again. They may be lighter, and then they get incredibly intense for January and February. So the effects there with the farmer is if they plant with the first rains, as was the tradition and the way that people would normally work, then their crops would germinate, and maize is a very, very important crop for them, as is beans and groundnuts. So their crops would germinate, and then the crops dry over the following weeks. And then they have to re-till the land and plant their crops again. And this cycle goes on, so that people start to use their seed and they're not sure when to plant. The other challenge that happens with erratic rains is things like, this one really shocked me as well, it's called army ants. So when the rains start and the little maize plants are germinating and they stop, you get an increased plague of army ants, and they eat the small crops. And so part of the issue is, how do you manage these new phenomena that are happening around the different issues that are there. And then when the rains really get going, they're so strong that they very often cause floods, or they cause damage. You'll get crops that will be damaged by it, or you'll get other issues that are challenging in that way. Maybe just to move on in terms of the gender issues. What we notice, if you go into rural Africa, you will find that the fields are very, very active at the planting season and that time of the year. And if you just stop for a while, you'll realize that most of it are women with children on their backs that are doing the work. Yes, there are some men planting tobacco, but the food crops are planted by women, and that's an issue that's been there for a long time, and that's the way the food system works. Women produce food in Africa. And so what is happening in terms of climate is, first of all, her attention when working the fields happens, and she has to redo this several times and plant it. The labor burden is increasing dramatically on women. And this is very often to the detriment of the other great role that she has to do, is to look after her family and care for her children. So the pressures on women in Africa is extreme. The other thing that's happening with climate change is, as there are increasing difficulties in livelihoods, men are being sent to go and look for salaries. And so they go into the cities, or they go to South Africa to the mines, or they go off trying to look for it. So you have the women back in the village, trying to care for the old people and the children and the family, the keepers of tradition, if you like. And the men are off elsewhere and very often don't come back. And so fragmentation in family is another huge issue that's there. So there's a whole range of these subtle issues, but that are very, very complex and really impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
And just in terms of the priority to address these effects, our mandate, if you like, as Irish Aid, is to try and see how we can address issues of malnutrition and hunger. That's a big key issue for us. Yes, we're involved in humanitarian work and a whole range of other activities, but the centre to what we want to do is in that area. And if the agricultural food security is being undermined, then it's actually driving increasing pressures on our ability to address nutrition issues. So there's a huge need to be able to incorporate this into our planning if we want to achieve the zero hunger.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And now my third panelist is Ryan McRobert, the Policy Advisor on International Climate Change of the Scottish Government. And again, it's that range of issues about recognising the climate effects on development, and is this a priority, and the gender dimension. Ryan.
Yep, thank you. Well, firstly, I should probably explain for those that aren't aware, the Scottish Government's a devolved administration within the UK, so as such, we operate under a reserve powers model, which means that while climate change is fully devolved to the Scottish Government, issues such as international negotiations and foreign aid and development is actually reserved to Westminster and the United Kingdom Government. However, that being said, the Scottish Government does have its own international development policy, which articulates basically the vision of Scotland being a good global citizen, committed to playing its part in addressing the key sort of challenges facing the world, one of which is obviously climate change and other being development. Within the Scottish Government, climate change is a big priority across all portfolio areas, and it's also began to emerge amongst our development activities. We recognise that climate change is one of the biggest threats to progress on development in the 21st century, and as such, we set up a small, and I mean, it's a really small in comparison to some of the other sort of development agencies that are here. It's a £9 million international development fund, which complements UK aid and development funding. And so far that's supported climate projects, principally mitigation projects actually, such as our Malawi Renewable Energy Acceleration Partnership, which is our biggest international development funding project to date, at just under, well, £1.7 million. On top of that, we've also climate change and development through our innovative Climate Justice Fund, which Mary actually helped launch a couple of years ago with our former First Minister Alex Salmond. We believe that this is, I think, the first climate change adaptation fund operating on climate justice principles anywhere in the world. And through that, we're now supporting 11 projects in 4 partner countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So on the question of gender, we particularly invited projects to apply to the Climate Justice Fund, which recognised gender and vulnerability issues to children. Our view of climate justice is that it's a human rights based approach, it's person-centred, and it's focused particularly on sharing benefits of equitable, sustainable development. Through the Climate Justice Fund, we're now, some of the sort of outcomes from our Round 1 funding is that we were supporting an Oxfam project in Zambia, which worked with small-scale farmers, especially women, so that they could adapt to climate change and improve water access and sanitation, including support for more productive and sustainable farming methods. Some of the other sort of outputs from that, from Round 1, have been that we've also managed to train over 100 women in Kazangula in Zambia in natural resource management, and we've also had nearly 7,000 children, boys and girls, participating in climate change clubs. So we're hoping that this initiative would help empower future generations to adapt and develop resistance to climate change.
Okay, well, Brian, since you moved on to the justice dimension, maybe I can put that also to Vera and to Adrian. I think you've spelt out that climate is making issues of livelihoods more precarious, more worrying. There's a strong gender dimension, as we've said. How do you deal with the justice dimension, that these are communities that aren't responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions? I mean, is that part of the approach, and if so, in what way?
That's a very important question, and I mean, to come to that question a little bit closer, I mean, how can it be that that we have to cope with the fact that those ones who didn't cause the whole trouble are most affected? So first of all is that the German government, is clearly looking into those countries who are most vulnerable to climate change. And kind of, channel funds into these countries. For example, in Bangladesh, which is most affected by climate change, and also in India. So to see that slowly by slowly we can also shift our portfolio more to climate change adaptation, or other sectors which are very relevant to climate change, such as water, or sea level rise, and so on, or agriculture. Plus, I do believe what is very important to make available the necessary funds for this. And the German government has quite increased its expenditure on climate change. So it was in 2005 where the German government spent about 471 billion euros on climate change. And now in the year of 2013, the German government spent about 2 billion euros on climate change, which is quite a tremendous increase. And this year, for example, our ministries said that they have committed 750 million euros to the Green Climate Fund, which is now coming into operations, and which is also supposed to spend half of its money, and we are close to 10 billion now.
10 billion, except that it's over several years.
Yeah, it is over several years.
Which is not really the commitment we need.
No, but I mean, you see that, I mean, in addition to what the German government is giving to multilateral funds, such as the new Green Climate Fund, there's also the bilateral funds which are made available. And what we can do is also, I mean, the way German development cooperation works, I mean, nearly in every country we have government negotiations. So here the German government also has the opportunity to discuss with the government of Peru or the government of Kenya about climate change and the importance to look into the issue. Because sometimes the story is that the subject is sitting with the ministries of environment, But we'll have to make sure that also other ministries are looking into this issue, and especially so that at the end of the day we can also work with the communities, because I mean it's those ones who are affected by the climate change, and we'll have to go much more into the issue of climate, community-based adaptation.
Thank you. Adrian, the Irish government and the Mary Robinson Foundation had a conference during Ireland's presidency of the EU 2 years ago on hunger, nutrition, climate justice. How has that affected work on the ground of Irish aid? Is the justice dimension more significant?
I think one of the things that came out of the conference, Mary, you remember well yourself, that there were people came from communities right across Africa and other parts of the world. They participated in the conference. There were case studies gathered from all different parts of the world. And I think for us, the information, the first-hand information from those people, the challenges to some of our ideas that were expounded in the conference and saying, you know, I don't think that's going to work, you know, I mean, and raising practical issues that were delivered on the ground. Set us to thinking that, you know, the key issue is to make sure that people are consulted and they're involved in the decisions and that they have information to know how to take those decisions that they need to take. And I think consulting is a very first step, a very important step, but then also targeting resources to make sure that we respond to those areas of work. And we've come to the conclusion that a large part is people having the resources to respond to the situations that they're presented with. For instance, if there's a situation where you lose your crop, the accumulation and the improvement in your family's well-being is set back. That external shock, as we call it, has then, you know, damaged their ability to advance towards their development and educate their children and to healthcare, etc. So the importance there is of developing social protection systems. Social protection systems that are built in institutionally, where resources are made available to people, and those cash transfers can actually help people to stabilize some of the issues with their livelihoods. I think very importantly, the issue of prioritizing resources to make sure you get to those most vulnerable. So looking at systems that go to the bottom 10% of the population and is not sort of the more broad subsidies that end up not really getting to where they need to go. And then I think there's a key issue for us, which is to strengthen the local delivery mechanisms. How do people work and operate at the local level? How can they take control of resources at the local level and be able to decide where the priority is for their implementation? And then finally, I think there's a huge problem that we have to address, which is addressing increasing transparency and accountability. I've been listening the past few days at people saying, look, you report on climate finance, but we can never find out where the money went, or did it even arrive in our country? And so we think that we've got to improve our reporting mechanisms. And there's a lady in the audience there, Gemma O'Reilly, if you get a chance to talk to her. She's been trying to map Irish climate finance, and believe you me, it's not an easy thing to do. But we've tried to make a first attempt, so you'll see on the website there's climate finance reports for the country, so we're saying this is what we've done here. Now, I'm sure there are issues with it, we've got to take it on further, but we are conscious that we really have to try and improve our accountability in that sense.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. I think that actually leads to probably the last question I'll ask you on this panel, because it links, I think, with the next panel. And that is, I'll start with you, Ryan. Where do you get the information that will help you in your work? What are the sources? How do you factor in and make sure that you can get the knowledge? And have you invested in monitoring and evaluation, a little bit of the issue that Adrian was raising there, accountability for the steps that you're taking?
Well, basically, through the way that our International Development Fund and our Climate Justice Fund operates, we partner with Scottish-based development organisations who in turn partner with development organisations within the target country or the country where the project is taking place. As such, we try and invest in networking partnerships and networking organisations in Scotland that will help build capacity in the international development sector, that's mainly around helping them develop their knowledge and build up a support network for them whenever they're actually operating in the target country. So there's two ones that we provide funding for, which is NIDOS, which is the Network of International Development Organisations in Scotland, and also the Scotland-Malawi partnership, because historically Scotland's had a strong connection with Malawi, and a lot of our funding actually goes towards projects in the countries. As the government, we're trying to address things such as policy coherence for development and align existing agendas on sustainability, human rights and climate change. Because, well, essentially we recognise that when funding's scarce, there's a need to make money stretch a little bit further. And aligning our climate and development streams makes a lot of sense for us just now. On the monitoring and evaluation, we place quite a strong emphasis on that. All of our projects are required to complete things such as mid-year and end-of-year reports, which with ongoing funding then dependent on if they're meeting their targets or not.
Okay, thank you. Vera, you actually mentioned climate proofing and indeed gender proofing, but I'd like to probe a little bit about where you look for and can you get adequate information about, especially about issues of adaptation, issues of addressing some of these climate shocks, and perhaps it's a slightly different question, but it hasn't come up so far. I mean, the need for the poorest to have access to clean energy. I mean, because that is very relevant also to the zero emissions. I mean, is enough being done on that? Is there a knowledge of how to increase the potential of access to clean energy for all?
Thank you, Mary, for this question. I mean, information is very important, and I remember some 2 years ago there was a person in our ministry responsible for the Southern African region. He said, well, we have so many programs, but I actually do not exactly know what will happen because of climate change in the countries where I'm responsible for. So what we did was that we teamed up with some scientific organizations also in Germany to make certain information available, so that this gentleman knows approximately that will it become drier, will there be more extreme weather events, and if so, where? And what is sometimes a bit a challenge is that you don't get downscaled information. So you might have it for a country or for a region, but not for a smaller area. So you have actually sometimes to invest some money to find out. And that is also very much important for the policymakers. And I also have seen in my working life that sometimes researchers, they have their graphs, and it is sometimes very difficult to understand what that means. For example, when you also have this different scenario and bow and so on. So some politicians, they just want to know in the 5 years where I'm responsible for this area, what will happen?
Yeah.
And do I have to act or not? So we also have to work with the scientists and the researchers to try to convince them to package their information in a more easy understandable way. Otherwise, politicians will find it difficult to act upon climate change challenges. Now I forgot your second question.
It's a slightly different question, but it sort of hasn't come up as yet in our discussion. To what extent you prioritize getting clean energy to the poorest, so that in fact they can help to bring themselves out of poverty to a certain extent?
I mean, renewable energy, for example, also because of the energy transition we are now happening in Germany since Fukushima happened and our chancellor decided we should skip our nuclear power plants. I mean, is a very important issue in Germany. So we have started a lot of programs on renewable energy, which also, has to do a lot with decentralized energy supply, which is then, much more closer to the poor people than if you have a big power plant, which is first of all delivering energy to certain, big cities and not to the rural poor. So this is kind of very important for us as well to see how we can give this decentralized renewable energy supplies to the poor people in the countryside.
Okay, thank you. Adrian, can I put those two questions to you? I think you were talking about the need for more transparency. Can you kind of spell out the way in which you access knowledge, you access information that will help in relation to seeds, in relation to the climate changes, etc. And also, are you monitoring and evaluating this approach? And then perhaps you'd also comment on the access to clean energy issue, because it does seem to me to be too important to leave out of this discussion.
Let me say that I think when you start to note the climate effects in different programs and projects, there's a temptation to sort of address the things you can visibly see, the immediate things in front of you, the symptoms, if you like. And I think there's a need for us to fully understand what's happening more broadly, and how do we need to adjust our policies and strategies to be able to address that. Irish Aid has a new policy for international development, which was launched about nearly 2 years ago. And the challenge was put down to us there to say, well, one of the priority areas of action is to deal with climate and development. And when we started to look and see how we would develop that, how we would respond to that, we realized that we needed help, we needed support. So we asked IID if they would support us to build a learning platform, the Climate Change and Development Learning Platform. And that platform tries to bring together what is actually happening at the local level in the programs and with our partners and with our partner governments, and where we're actually making investments at that level, and document them and track them over time. We're not going to get answers in a few months. These have to be longitudinal processes. I mean by that, processes that run over a year. So we have to have sustained investment in learning from what's actually happening in a practical sense. And the learning platform has a number of components. One is that we develop case studies of where we're systematically implementing work over a number of years, identifying the baselines of where the situation is at currently, and then trying to track what's happening and learning from it. One of the things that we noticed was that our ability to identify what's going to happen in the future and predict a little bit was very weak.
Yeah.
We don't have long-term scenario planning in the sense there. And it was very, very interesting to hear the German experience there in GIZ. And I think there's probably importance for us to get together and to learn from these things as well and see how we do it. So scenario planning is something we want to look at. The other issue there for us was we needed to also, maybe change our guidance systems and look at the way we work internally and train our staff, but together with our partners, so that we're working jointly on this and to strengthen those nexus and links. And also, I suppose, probably very, very important for us was to look and see how do we actually disseminate the knowledge. So we've built, again, with IID, we've built a learning platform, web-based component, and anyone who would like to be a member of that can request to join it, and we can see how we can facilitate it. But the idea is to get the learning from the local level, and then for us to be able to draw on that and inform our policy. And then in terms of energy, if I may,
Briefly, yeah.
I'm going to be very bold. I'm going to refer to the work that you helped launch in Malawi with the cook stoves, which again is work that we do jointly with GIZ. I think they have a long history in working in cook stoves. But there's an interesting piece of work. One of the things about energy is, well, first of all, we all need energy. And very, very often when people are thinking about tackling poverty, you tend to look at food or those immediate needs of shelter, but energy gets way down the list. So in sub-Saharan Africa, energy is going to need biomass, firewood, charcoal, those kind of things for a long time, because there's nothing else, you know. And it's not necessarily the issue that there's not necessarily access. I've seen villages with electricity cables running over them, but people don't have the money to connect up. They don't have the ability there in that sense. So what do people use? They use firewood. How do they use it? They use tree stone fire. That's very inefficient. So, and then when you start looking at the statistics in Malawi, you find that the forest cover is depleting every year by 2.8%. The ability for biomass that's being consumed is 37%. That's what it regrows back each year of the consume. So how can you increase the efficiency at the local level by what the women are using? How can we make that environment better in the house with less smoke so that it puts less pressure in terms of health? And then how can you grow more biomass? That's one little very practical demonstration. But I think these things have to be investigated and explored. And I'm sure, I can see Simon looking at me there, I'm sure he'd want me to say, you need to look at production energy and a whole lot of other things. But I leave that for him to say.
Okay, well, I think we've had a very good discussion in this part of the structure of this morning. It's quite clear from the three of you that climate is aggravating the situation. We need to both take it more seriously and integrate it better, and there needs to be a better knowledge base, which I think leads me to my next panel. So thank you very much to you three. Please show your appreciation, and I'll invite my next panel to come up.